Welcome to the Shadow People, Part 5. What I am about to tell you is not for the faint of heart. Some who have encountered these shadows report being pulled from their world entirely, snatched into realms that resemble our own, yet twist and distort in ways impossible to describe. A man in rural Ohio awoke to find himself standing in his kitchen, yet everything was subtly wrong. The angles of the cabinets were off, the light behaved strangely, and the air felt heavy, almost alive. Shadows moved along the walls, observing, guiding, and sometimes retreating into corners that seemed to stretch endlessly. These abductions are often disorienting, not violent. People describe being carried through spaces that defy the normal rules of time and geometry. One woman in Scotland recounted a corridor that seemed to extend for miles, though she was certain it was only her home. Another, a teenager in Japan, spoke of waking in her room only to discover days had passed in the outside world, though she remembered moments that felt like years. It is as though the shadows manipulate the very fabric of reality, bending it to a form that suits their observation or testing. Mirror worlds are common in these accounts. Reflections appear distorted, sometimes showing figures that are not present in the room. A man in Germany reported stepping toward a mirror, only to see his reflection replaced by a tall, featureless figure that mimicked his movements with subtle delays. Those who tried to interact found that the figure anticipated their every action, moving in ways impossible to replicate naturally. The experience left him disoriented, and he noted that even small objects in his room had shifted when he returned to normal perception. Time behaves unpredictably during these encounters. Survivors often describe moments stretching or contracting, sensations of déjà vu, or periods when minutes feel like hours. A woman in Canada recalled stepping into her hallway, seeing a shadow across the far wall, and when she looked again, an entire night had passed. Objects moved, whispers occurred, and subtle signs appeared to indicate presence and awareness. Those who have experienced this repeatedly often report that the shadows are methodical, deliberate, and patient, measuring perception, patience, and response. And though these experiences are terrifying, they are rarely violent in a traditional sense. The danger lies in the unknown, in the impossibility of fully grasping what occurs, and in the profound disorientation that follows. Those who survive report a lingering sense of observation, the feeling that the shadows continue to watch, waiting for the next threshold, the next moment of vulnerability, or the next opportunity to interact. But the most frightening accounts were those who did not return the same, or at all. And what I discovered next made me question whether anyone truly understood the rules of these realms. Some who return from these experiences are not quite themselves. A man in Poland described being pulled into a space where time seemed fluid. He witnessed events that had not yet occurred in the outside world, yet they felt real. Shadows moved around him, silent and deliberate, as if orchestrating the flow of moments. When he returned, only hours had passed in reality, but his memory contained days, sometimes weeks, of events he could not explain. Mirror worlds are particularly deceptive. Several witnesses describe rooms that mirror their own homes, yet everything is slightly altered. Doors lead to nowhere, windows reflect landscapes that do not exist, and figures move independently of physical laws. A teenager in Italy recalled a reflection in a mirror that did not mimic her movements exactly. It would pause, tilt its head, and linger where she was not. She said the experience left her feeling both terrified and fascinated, as though the figures were teaching her to see in ways she never had before. Time distortions are common, and they vary. One woman in Canada reported being outside her home for what seemed like a few minutes, only to return and find a day had passed. Another in Japan described events that felt like years compressed into a single moment, with shadows moving along walls and whispering messages she only partially understood. These distortions are not chaotic. They are deliberate, structured, and often paired with observation, as though the figures measure perception itself. Some who escape entirely carry knowledge, clues, or warnings. They speak of rules that the shadows follow, thresholds, attention, and timing. Certain places, certain moments seem to trigger these abductions more frequently: old corridors, crossroads, abandoned buildings, and moments of heightened emotional vulnerability. Survivors often report that repeated exposure leads to patterns. The shadows test patience, the ability to perceive details, and the courage to confront what is seen. Objects often shift subtly during these encounters. Books, tools, or furniture may move just enough to suggest a presence, but not enough to confirm it directly. Whispered words, too soft to catch at first, are sometimes understood only in retrospect, and always the watchers are patient, deliberate, measuring how humans respond, learning, observing, and sometimes communicating in ways that are subtle but meaningful. But the most disturbing accounts were those who barely escaped, reporting not just observation, but the reason behind the surge in sightings. And what they revealed was far more terrifying than anything I had imagined. The most unsettling discoveries came from those who barely escaped. A woman in the United States described being drawn into a space where shadows moved with purpose, guiding her through rooms that warped like liquid. She felt time stretch and compress around her, objects shifting subtly as if to communicate, to warn, or to teach. When she finally returned, only moments had passed in the world outside, but she carried knowledge that would haunt her for life. These beings were appearing more frequently and not at random. Reports from across the globe echoed the same pattern. A man in Norway found himself outside his cabin, observing shadows lining the tree line, their forms fluid but deliberate. A child in Japan described multiple figures moving in sequences almost choreographed in a corridor that should have been empty. Survivors spoke of being tested, challenged to perceive, to notice, to endure. Those who failed, they whispered, were left behind, their absence noted in ways the world seldom recognized. Time itself seemed to bend in these realms. Some returned with recollections of moments that stretched into decades or compressed into minutes. They described spatial anomalies, hallways that extended impossibly, staircases leading to nowhere, rooms that changed with every glance. Shadows manipulated these spaces deliberately, as though the environment itself was a tool to gauge perception, patience, and awareness. Survivors often sensed lessons hidden in the distortions, though the meaning was rarely clear at the time. The reasons behind the surge in sightings remain speculative. Some suggest that dimensional barriers are thinning, that human perception is expanding, or that the watchers have grown more active in response to changes in the world. Whatever the cause, the accounts are consistent: increased encounters, more elaborate interactions, and a rising intensity in observation. Those who survive often emerge changed, alert, cautious, aware that a simple glance, a hesitation, or a whisper could bring the shadows closer. And you must understand, these beings are not malicious in the traditional sense. They are deliberate, patient, and intelligent, measuring, observing, and occasionally interacting. But their purpose remains hidden, their methods obscure, and their increasing presence in the modern world is a warning, one that demands awareness, respect, and caution. But after decades of collecting accounts, the most alarming discovery was that modern times have made them more visible. And what I learned about their acceleration changed everything I believed. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for Part 6.